Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yes, I am the first presenter, so I have to wake up early in the morning to be ready. So I am not usually a morning person, so I'll have lots of coffee available for myself. Um, but today I'm going to talk to you guys about just a sneak peek of dialogic learning and how I kind of came about teaching and a little bit of stumbling across really dialogic learning. Myself personally, I taught for about 11 years and I started out in specialty and then really got into teaching. And I taught throughout, working in specialty as well, but I really wanted to teach. That was a big part of it. And we are not taught how to teach normally as technicians or even DVMs. We just kind of get thrown in and start teaching. So many times we aren't taught different methods of teaching our students. And so it is very difficult for us to become great educators without having this training. So thankfully, we have AVTE to be able to give us great training as well on how to teach our students a little bit better. So some of the little sneak peeks I'm going to give you guys for some of my talks are to dialogic learning. So as you guys may know, our past and what we have learned was very teacher-centered. So hopefully some of you can recall some pictures that kind of look like this of teaching back, later, and even college learning that looks a little bit like this, if you can see, where you have rows of students, you have your teacher, whether they're standing and back talking to you, or just lecturing in a hall, doing a PowerPoint, stuff like that. Even myself right now, I would be teaching just like this, not having a dialogue with anyone else can be, boring to people, right? So traditional teaching, it's teacher-centered, not a lot of information is retained. There's not a lot of participation from other individuals. People lose attention quickly, right? And we're expecting students to all move at the same pace, which is not typically what most students can do. You have different students who are at different levels and they come from different backgrounds, right? They all don't do math at the same level, I've found, right? So we have to expect their learning to be at different levels. So what we would like to see is more of student-centered. So I gave you kind of an example, and this is kind of the amount of drawing capability that I have. But this is student-centered learning versus teacher-centered learning. So teacher-centered learning, we have our teacher who has that knowledge and experience, and they just spew out the information, right? And essentially what students do is they regurgitate that information on a piece of paper. And it may work in some of the lower end classes, where they get the flashcards, they memorize it and spew it out. Great. But in our upper classes, we want to then have them critically think, get that knowledge, experience, and beliefs from the outside. And whether or not it's right or wrong, we want them to critically think about it, collaborate with each other and even the instructor, and have some of that knowledge, creativity, and put it all together. It makes for a really fun classroom. So these aren't new ideas. This has been around for a while. So Plutarch, so it's very old, said the mind is not a vessel that needs filling, but wood that needs igniting. So truly these students that we have, they signed up because they are really excited to be, vet techs and be in school. And so many times they're just bored at some point. So we really need to keep them excited about, learning. Currently, we have people who are in the field right now, and we want them to continue to learn too. And many of them don't want to do additional continuing education, because what do? We have continuing education where they sit in a conference hall and just not really collaborate with each other, critically think, do hands-on group work, that kind of stuff. We put them in a lecture hall. It's not exciting. One of my favorites is Albert Einstein. Education is not the learning of facts, but it's the training to think, but the training of the mind to think, right? We want to exercise our mind. Critically thinking is important. So we have the 5 C's of education, okay? So it was previously the 4 C's of education, and I keep adding C's because why not, right? So giving students a choice of what they want to do in projects, stuff like that. Giving them options is always nice. They still have to do something, all right? But giving them a choice is kind of fun. Collaborating with them, with other students, right? Making dialogue with your students is incredibly important. Communicating with everyone and others. And then creativity. When you make your students think about stuff and seeing their creative side, you learn so much about them. Really pushing them beyond their limits is awesome. And then critically thinking about stuff. You know, if you give them the lecture ahead of time and do case-based things in class, that critically thinking aspect makes class so much fun. So, it doesn't know where to go. Okay, sorry, my PowerPoint didn't want to move further. All right, so cognitive biases. So in our field, we do have cognitive biases, right? So when we talk about cognitive biases and we're teaching, they're called blind spots. So those blind spots, whenever we are talking about certain subjects, these subjects could be things that we have learned within the field that we tell owners every day because this is what we were trained within, you know, by salespeople or even the veterinarians you work with or what you learned previously in school, right? So certain things such as, doesn't want to work. So nutrition, right? Behavior, breeding, spaying and neutering, and alternative therapies, right? So making sure that we are seeing that neutral end of these type of subjects. So not to say, okay, well, we think that Hill's food or Royal Canin is the only foods that you can feed, you know, your patients or anything like that. But making sure that we're teaching them the very basics of those subjects, behavior, making sure that we aren't just being biased on a certain subject, but making sure we're going over all of that stuff. Spaying and neutering. Hey, let's teach them all of the different options available, whether it's ovarian sparing, vasectomies, okay? And not just necessarily saying, no, we can't do that, but exposing them to all of the options out there. It may not be something that you necessarily believe in or that something that they will see, but we need to make sure that we are exposing them to those things and having those conversations in class. It makes for a great discussion and it's exciting. Alternative therapies are really cool too because they have questions about those things. So I took on a huge nutritional content part of my class. And so I made my students do a Purina CE aspect of the class. And I picked Purina because it had a great CE content, not because I necessarily love Purina or anything about it. I actually looked at all of the different CE that's out there, like Hills and Royal Canin and all of that. But Purina's broke it down to the very basics. And they also sent free things to each student. So that was the other part. But they got 18.5 credit hours of CE straight when they were in school, which I thought was great, additional CE. And then we had also nutrition debates. So they had to pick a certain brand out of a cup, and whether it was Pedigree, you know, Royal Canin, whatever, and they debated against each other, which was so much fun in class because who doesn't like debating, right? And so which one had better content? Pedigree beat Royal Canin because they could come up with better arguments against Royal Canin. Not necessarily that it was true, like that truly pedigree's better than Royal Canin, but those people were way more prepared than the Royal Canin. Who can sell what better, right? So it was a really fun activity that we could do, and they actually learned from it. Breaking down nutrition projects. So they broke down ingredients, they looked at everything. We went to a feed store and had a field trip and looked at everything, looked at treats and all of that other stuff, getting out of school, having fun. And then we did a popcorn and a movie session where we watched a documentary. So making sure not to sell a brand or not knocking something unless you actually know about it. And then really giving out like free samples to students. I contacted a ton of different places to make sure that I could get free samples. They're really good about giving free samples for sure. I also did a fear-free project for my students, and this was in my anesthesia class. And I only did an anesthesia because at the time I was teaching anesthesia, and they didn't do it in lower end classes. So I really tailored it to the anesthesia class. But I gave the students an opportunity to evaluate how our school was handling fear, anxiety, and stress. And I also said, okay, write me in not necessarily an opinionated paper, but it ended up kind of being opinionated, right? And tell me what you think that we are doing good and what we can do that's better at this point. And from there, I tailored it so that later we can make improvements. So here, after we wrote that paper, we started an enrichment program. And so we created what's called the Spider Framework. So it was designed after Disney Animal Kingdom enrichment program. And so I will be talking to you guys more about this in September and then also in October in length, because this actually went on and evolved for probably about a year because it was a very, very lengthy project, but it was super, super cool. And our animals completely changed and our student body completely changed of the way that they looked at the animals, the way that our students just felt about school. It was incredible to see. So the sixth C that we have is curiosity, okay? So curiosity, studies show that 4-year-olds ask about 200 to 300 questions a day, and it decreases with age. Why? Is because we disrupt kids' imaginations, okay? We give them the answers, we give them that in the lecture, and it doesn't make them, you know, think about like other things. So we really need to ask them or have them ask more questions. And so giving them, again, options to doing projects. So this is one project that I will be talking to you guys about in October that we ended up doing for one of my anesthesia classes. I had students writing children's books about anesthesia. I had people talking about old anesthetic protocols from back in history and stuff like that. People made videos, things like that. So really making students become more creative with projects and learning was really fun. And the last C, so the seventh C, is turning the idea of teacher into a coach, a mentor, and someone who inspires, okay? So students have to overcome adversities, just like all of us. And so becoming a great role model for these students is incredibly important. Feeling as if you can sit down and have a conversation with them and talk about anything to help them means a lot to them. We don't just show up in class and then leave and grade their homework and that's it. We have to be able to help them in any type of situation. I worked at a college where students were low income. They came from homes that were abusive. You know, there were drugs involved, stuff like that. And so coming to school had to be their safe place to go. And so we have to be able to handle those situations delicately and feel as though we're there, you know, we're gonna protect them in some sort of way when they're at school. We need to also make sure that we're firm and teaching them those soft skills. And And that is incredibly important for when they go out into having a job, and it does change their life incredibly. There are students now that I feel like they completely changed while they were in school, and it's incredible. And then holding them accountable and giving them greater expectations than what just AVMA requires or recommends to them, because they can do much, much more. So we have to believe in them, and they know that. And then students feel inspired when instructors see that you are passionate in what you are teaching and that you are passionate for them, okay? So, you know, when you were in school, so thinking back to when you had your teachers, what are your memories that you treasured the most, right? Do you remember what instructor inspired you? So making sure that you are gonna be that teacher that you once were inspired by. And that is what I have for you guys as my little intro. So I hope that you guys come in and check it out.
Thank you very much, Beth Ann.
Sure.
It's interesting, and I love the Prezi.
Thank you.
I actually have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
How you mentioned like blind spots, and I totally get it. But how do you make sure that you stay as neutral as possible?
I mean, it definitely can be hard, but it's making sure that you are open-minded, you know, like I think that when I was in school, especially like nutrition, we were just taught like what AD is and BD is and CD is for Hill's food, and we were never taught, you know, truly what the breakdown is of all ingredients. And I mean, I learned, it's kind of weird, but like about ovarian sparing and vasectomies, I learned that from my student when she did a project for my class. And so it was me just being open to like, okay, am I gonna do that for my pet? I don't know, but I just want students to be able to be exposed to that, because it is something out there in the field. And so we can't just limit ourselves to every pet should be spay and neutered at 6 months old of age all the time. We have to expose them to as much content and information as possible. Give them studies to educate them a little bit more, and stuff like that. So yeah, just not be narrow-minded. So
I've got another one, if you don't mind.
yeah.
So you mentioned thinking about that moment or that person who was passionate, right? Do you have a specific moment for you or memory for you? Because it seems like you have a lot of really interesting lessons and keeping the creativity going. I'm just wondering if there was like something that you think about that, yeah.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of really great memories from my school. I was so lucky to have really great instructors when I went to school. They were incredibly hard, you know, but they cared very much about teaching and educating, and they were incredibly passionate about veterinary technicians and their role in veterinary medicine. And so it set the tone for me on the first day, essentially. Like, these people care about us and our role in veterinary medicine. So when I started teaching, it was my way of saying, like, I need to give back to the veterinary community in this way, like setting up I tell my students now, I'm like, you're my next generation, because I have to, you know, have to get you guys prepared, because now I have to leave someday. But yeah, I mean, they were great role models for me to, you know, they all had different experiences within the field, but they all were very, very great educators.